Welcome to the English Homemaker podcast, a podcast where we discuss all things home, a realistic but fresh view of homemaking from the suburbs of the south of England. I'm your host, Alyssa Evelyn. Welcome to episode 22 of the English Homemaker. Welcome back to the podcast, brother of mine.
Hello, little sister. How are you?
I'm doing okay. How are you?
Full of joy.
I just went to the allotment for the briefest allotment visit. And I got what is supposedly rainbow corn, but really is slightly blue, slightly yellow, funky looking corn. That because there was hardly any sunlight this year, looks a little sad.
Yeah, so not massive cobs.
No, they're at least fully developed now, but it's
Nice.
taken until now, which is what, 11th of October.
And how many cobs per stalk?
A good 2.
Whoa. See, that's good innings. That's a very good innings of corn. Well done. Must be a rather rich soil in your allotment, a legacy soil, or you must have put some good fertilizer on there.
Yeah, it's pretty good soil, actually, I'd say. Yeah.
Good.
Stuff seems to grow. The courgette went bonkers.
Corn is
anyway,
hungry.
What about you?
What have I done today? I woke up. I've traveled a lot yesterday, so I was pretty tired. So we just, what did I do? Unpacked from yesterday, and I went to the dairy, saw our friends, helped them move some polytunnel ends, picked up some carrots, dropped off a couple of turned bowls with them, and moved some English fruitcake around the local sort of like food place. So dropped off some fruitcake bits with people, and just generally sort of like re-engaged, went for a bit of a cycle, obviously there, cycled back, picked up 8 litres of milk from the dairy to stop up the fridge. So yeah, all in all, pretty, for me, that's a pretty uneventful day so far.
Yeah, it sounds like a lot.
No, I think all of that excitement happened over hour and a half. 2
Okay.
hours.
And I know where you've been traveling, but the listeners might not. So tell them what you've been doing.
I have been reskilling a little bit. I want to go and pick up a few more handcrafts. So I went from Sweden to England, and then for 10 days, I was in Devon for 6 of those days, learning how to make cooking knives on a charcoal forge by hand. And that was really good. And then I went up to the Peak District, so then about Hazel Basketry from Dan Lawrence. I was in Devon with Dave Budd, who's Dave Budd Handmade Tools, I believe, on Instagram. And Dan Lawrence is Dan Lawrence UK on Instagram. Both of them fantastic craftsmen. Really, really recommend both their stuff and their teaching. And I saw you as well in real life, only like 2 days ago, which is insane.
It's so good. It was so good. And I got to see all your handiwork, which is really cool.
Really enjoyed that. They're all tidier now. They're all sharpened things and starting to put handles on them. Very, very exciting.
You are so fast that just, only just got back.
Got to do things, otherwise you lose like all the momentum. You always got to keep going, Not because keep going, that sounds like it's a drudgery, but it's fantastic. I feel very motivated by joy. To keep the motivation of joy alive is a task in quite a dark world sometimes. I think it's very easy to get into like, I deserve to rest and put my feet up, and the lie that is, because not you don't deserve it, but because actually there's no joy there really. There's sometimes joy in an activity, but generally at the end of work, not before.
Yes, agreed. So. No, that's good. Yeah. That's good. That's important. So today we are talking about something I'm very excited about, and I can't believe we haven't done a podcast about this yet, but I suppose it probably underpins a lot of the podcasts I've done, not just with you, but with other people who believe in these principles and apply them. And some people that have never even heard of it will also be applying these principles without even knowing that they relate to what we're talking about. So we're going to talk about permaculture, what that is. We're going to talk about it as if none of you have ever heard about permaculture before, and how it applies to the homemaker. And I suppose in that we've both got 2 separate perspectives, because I live in the suburbs. I don't have much land. So my view of permaculture and the way I can apply it will be very different to yours in Sweden with some land. Maybe you can tell us, I don't know, actually, I can't think of when I first heard about permaculture. Can you? No,
Um,
it's a difficult one.
Neither can I. I know who the first people I started following permaculture people were. I think Ben Falk and Jeff Lawton, probably Jeff Lawton first. I think I was looking at food forests or forest building or something. And then someone said, oh, check out this guy who makes food forests. So I was like, a forest made of food? That sounds amazing. And I think I was working as a forest schools teacher and we were designing spaces for children to learn in. And started thinking like, I just want to plant lots of fruit trees. And how do I do that? So it's not just like an orchard. How do I plant a forest? I think maybe that's where I got to. And there was a guy down in Devon, like one of the first guys who just planted up like an early food forest. This is like a million years ago, maybe 12 years ago. So I think then I went on a deep dive, as you do. Like, this seems interesting. Food forests. And then you go into the whole thing of like, what are you doing there? Why are you doing that? Does it actually work? And then you do the thing that everyone does, which thinks that your place, because you've watched a lot of people in the subtropics, is the subtropics, and fruit trees will grow faster, and they don't. And then your food forest stays tiny for ages, and then 12 years later, when you drive past it, and there's children playing under trees that you planted at tiny twigs, and they're literally little kids running around underneath it as you drive past the school that you planted them in, and you're just like, oh, it's amazing. All you got to do is wait 12 years, and it's
Yeah.
such an incredible space.
It's a long haul.
Yeah. But again, I think that's the most important thing about permaculture is it is not about gardens or homesteading.
Yeah.
It is like a design science or a way of viewing things with the reality of your permanence in a space and building a culture around permanence and something that is therefore sustainable, because if it's going to survive permanently, it needs to be sustainable. And that is so important in the home, perhaps more than like all of the cool permaculture things, which took me a little while to remember. Because the cool permaculture things get a lot of like social credit, and it doesn't necessarily build a culture that is permanent or renewable or beautiful or sustains. And I think that also a lot of people sort of, the permaculture breaks everything down into zones, like zone 1, which is close to the house, zone 2, which is like your main vegetable garden, zone 3, which is like your food forest, and zone 4, which is wild. I probably got those wrong. Now I've said them with such permanence. But there's also a lot of people talk about zone 0 and zone 00, and zone 0 being like the home, like the people in the home, and zone 00 being like your inside, like the deep work of the inside, and the permanence of that. And I think that a lot of people are so busy building their zone 3 beautifully that they forget about all the other zones. And they're thinking people who really focus on zone 2 and have this incredible vegetable garden, but they're broken the inside of the home culture, or the way that their family runs isn't sustainable or requires massive inputs from China or from California media to sustain it. That's far darker and sadder than, like, you can look outside and look at my amazing fruit trees. I've got 792 fruit trees on my 1/10 of an acre. But my communication with my wife or my partner is really bad.
Yes, I love that about the set of principles, is it really is all encompassing, and communication is definitely included in there.
Yeah.
I think I've been thinking, I think where I first heard about permaculture, probably not the very first, but the first time I really deep dived was like tiny houses, when those were like a thing. And I watched repeated different tiny houses, and a lot of tiny houses live on bigger land, and people do live a permaculture lifestyle in a tiny house. So I think sometimes those would come in and I was like, ooh, okay, so what is this? And then deep dove from there. Love the idea of a tiny house, but I'm like almost 6 foot tall, and I think I'd struggle a little bit. But your house probably counts as a tiny house.
I mean, our house is relatively square footage wise, towards the larger end of a tiny house. Not tiny house. It's not on wheels, or it doesn't have a permanent foundation. So maybe it doesn't. But our house is relatively small, and I love it because of that. It works so much better because it's small.
It functions beautifully. Yeah.
Everything has to be. I think there's sometimes you can sort of, it's actually harder, I think, to make. There's not a necessity. There's a necessity for our home to function. And because it has to, it does. I think if it didn't, we had more space, we'd just fill it up.
Yes.
And we would utilize it less well, and rooms wouldn't have multiple functions because they didn't need to. and then certain things that would be done in the home would be moved out of the home. They would be like in a shed, or daddy goes here to do that, or mummy has to do this there, and then the kid would have less exposure to it. And that would slowly erode aspects of the culture that we wish to build in the home, psychologically, emotionally, physically, all those things.
I kind of love how in your house there's always some kind of wood shavings everywhere, somewhere, or in a pile.
Yeah, I mean, there is at the moment. The moment we have a problem where someone sent us something in a polystyrene with a polystyrene blocker. We had to get a new mincer, and they sent it from like goodness knows where in China. Not sustainable. But when we're processing like maybe 3 lambs, I think on Tuesday, then we need like the electric mince. We've tried to do it by hand, and I find that the mince doesn't come out. There's not enough. The mince doesn't extrude well. That's the word. Yeah, the root doesn't extrude well. It gets all mushy. And you get ground meat, which is the aim, I guess, but you don't get like mince in the same way.
Okay, so have you got polystyrene snow all over your sitting room?
So we have polystyrene snow all over the sitting room at the moment, which is great. I dealt with it, cleaned it up yesterday. My children were like, "Oh man, he's put all the polystyrene snow in one place. We must decorate the home again." And you're like, "Aha, wonderful." So to put things in perspective, yes, we do usually have wood chips everywhere, but today it's polystyrene snow, which is less than ideal.
So shall we delve into, there's a sort of set of ethics and then there's like a set of principles. And I did, in fact, you know how you were like, I think there's 3 ethics. I have got the 4th one written down. I told you I did. Yeah. So the main sort of 3 that you might have heard of before are earth care, people care, and fair share. And then the sort of sneaky 4th one is reduce consumption.
Nice.
Yeah. So those are the kind of overarching ethics to which all of the principles respond, I suppose.
Yes. Yeah.
And I think lots of more modern theories and philosophies, things like zero waste, waste-free, plastic-free, all those things are kind of maybe slightly byproducts, like a slightly smaller version
derivatives
of permaculture. Whereas actually I think if you take permaculture as a sort of bigger way of living philosophy, kind of guidance system, I think you're probably better off. It's less kind of prescriptive and it's supposed to be very individual because everybody lives in a different place with a different life, with a different set of everything. And these can be applied in so many different ways. So the first principle, or should we talk more about the ethics?
I mean, I think the ethics, when you go through the principles, we will then feed back to the ethics. I think that's always the best way because the ethics always inform the principles. Because if you just did the principles, you could apply vicious capitalist ethics to them and be like, I can get a yield, work in the garden for free. For example.
Yes, that's a good one. That's a good example.
And you could then take all the excess and make money from it and then use it to abuse people. Wonderful. Or you can apply the ethics to it and have something that's quite wonderful, rejuvenative, and adds to everyone.
Yes. Okay. Principle number 1 is observe and interact.
Yeah, that's really good.
It is. I like that. That's principle number 1 is like stop and look and figure out what's going on in your space, in your life. And that can be applied in so many ways. I think for me, this is one, as a homemaker, you just sort of repeat, do, and you don't really take a lot of time to stop and pause. It's the same with being a parent or a wife or a spouse. You just, so many people are just stuck doing the same thing every day, waking up and repeating, and we don't take that time to stop and interact. And I think that I love that that's number 1.
Yeah, I mean, I can only agree with you. I think that stopping yourself by being reactive is a really important part in life or in design or anything, or parenting. It's very easy to just sort of start like putting out fires or reacting to external input, external pressures, and just being able to stop and observe and engage with the reality of things is the only way in which we can make positive change or build positive systems in home, in your own mind, all these things. And I think it is really difficult, whether it's a design or it's internal, because when you actually look at what's going on, you often don't get to do what you want. So, for example, in our garden, I really had this beautiful design for the half acre that I imagined. Then you have to stop and look at the rain and rainfall and the sunlight and the arc of the sun in winter and go, oh, okay, so now I know those. I have to do this. Okay, I don't get to do that. It's a shame because I'd quite like to be able to put two pawpaw trees there, but just because I want to. And in fact, some of my design initially was very much designed on what would look cool in permaculture. I had like the trees in a completely different area and they looked really cool, but they did not grow very well. And when they came to fruiting, it was just a mess. And it wasn't sustainable. I hadn't built in the sustainability of how I was going to fertilize the area that I'd started fertilizing, because I had a huge amount of free wood chips, like unbelievable amounts of free wood chips. And they did an incredible job for the soil. But I didn't think about how I was going to get the next 3 tons of wood chips necessarily, because they just seemed to be falling out of the sky. Initially, I was like, everyone's chipping everything. I'm just going to get free wood chips. And I'm going to build a whole system on this, which is an external input, which is a terrible idea. But that being said, the same for the internal system of your family is like, or yourself. When you look at it, sometimes you have to look at hard realities and go, oh, wow, I'm not doing well, or I want to be able to do this. I have deep desires for this, but I have no energy. And then you have to look at, okay, where am I going to garner more energy from? Where am I going to garner more passion from? Where can I get that? And is the source of that a sustainable thing? And how do I make myself a sustainable source of inspiration or joy or motivation? And sometimes that can be just like from the engagement with, and if you eventually you'll build it into the system, but you do need to build systems for that aren't reliant on external input. Yeah. But it needs to be not reliant on external input. Like, there's a whole period of time where my wife was not very well mentally for a really long time. And the worst part of that, we had an unsustainable system where when she was having a particularly bad day, my eldest daughter and I at that point, and my son, would go to M&S and buy an Eccles cake, because it was a nice long walk, like half an hour walk, go down, buy an Eccles cake, walk slightly longer route back. And by that point, we'd all calm down. We could bring out calm energy. She had a space to calm down. Completely unsustainable, right? Because Eccles cakes at M&S are very, very expensive. Not, but like you're spending like, every time you're going out to calm down, it costs you 15, 20 quid. And if you do that every day for months, it's very expensive, unsustainable. Work to function for that period of time, but then actually losing the capacity to do that forces you to engage with the problem. So sometimes it's good that your systems fall apart and you get to have the opportunity to engage those systems. But until that system fell apart, or we stopped and observed it, you didn't realize how unsustainable it was. It was just like, this input comes in, stressed wife, and she gets too stressed, and she's really struggling mental health wise, and she needs space. So take all the children out and we all get cake. And that functions, but long term it doesn't. And it also means that you get to ignore or bypass the work that observation and then engagement would cost. And sometimes, basically what I'm saying is, there are times where observing and engagement difficult, but ultimately going through them leads to something always far greater for you, your family, and the whole system.
Yes, no, it is really hard, and it's hard to change habits that are really set, no matter how bad they are for you long term. Like, I struggle to break the sort of system of, it gets to the end of the day, I'm tired. I feel the urge to sit down with a cup of tea and watch TV. And there's nothing wrong with that. Absolutely nothing. But if it happens on repeat every single day, I'm missing doing some of the other things that I would really like to do.
Can I counter that and say that the reliance on two external things to find relaxation and joy, even though it's nothing wrong with it, like nothing wrong with the thing, just like the thing, it's a system, but it's not a whole system. It's not sustainable without massive input of media and all that costs in the world, and what that actually takes away from that. And it's not saying that that's not a good tool to occasionally you use or enliven your system, but I think the dependence on it for comfort is where it shows a highlights in the system, like it highlights something in the system. So observing it and go, oh, I observed that. What's that? What does that give me that I can't create for myself?
Yes.
What could I do to create a more permanent, joyful system in my home?
So I have
What?
actually made
Yeah.
steps
Oh,
towards that.
great.
So I've decided that because part of the reason is the TV is next to the fire. So for half the year, I'm sat next to the fire. But previously, there was nothing much else in that room. So in the
Yeah.
last year, we bought a very lovely piano, which is also now in that room, so I can play piano. And also now I'm bringing all of my books into that room. So
Nice.
logically, there's a fire, there's a book, there's snuggly chairs. The good things should happen. They're more likely to happen, and the habits
Yeah.
should change by simply being literally faced with loads of books that I really want to read or browse or peruse. And the other thing I've done is to bring down my sort of things I craft within the evening. So kind of like my little like crochet is always nearby, rag rug making is always nearby, something I can
Mhm.
pick up and do that isn't pressing a box of buttons
Really
mindlessly. It's the
important. Yeah.
mindless doing of
Yeah.
that that's the
Yeah.
issue, not the actual doing of it.
No, exactly. And the
Um,
more you do craft, the more that becomes the thing that helps switch your brain off. I think in those, if you can push through, generally crafting in the evening for about, I think for me, it takes about, now it doesn't take any time at all. It takes about 5 to 7 days taking a new craft into the evening before it becomes something who's like, you're barely thinking about it. Like when you showed me how to rag rugging, that the first 3 evenings of that were like, I'm exhausted at the end of the evening and I'm still pushing through to learn rag rugging. But then I think 3 evenings, 4 evenings in, I was like, oh, I'm barely thinking about it. Just quickly, where's the scissors? Chop, chop, and suddenly you've got, you're making something at the same time, which helps calm your brain, soothes you. I mean, you can have a little chat with your wife, or you can at least you can do the next one, which is like obtaining a yield, isn't it next?
I'm having a look. Nope, that's number
Mm.
three.
Okay. Well, I'm skipping
um,
ahead.
the other couple of things that
Mm.
I've written down for observe and interact for the home are things like meal planning, having a look at what ingredients you have, interacting with them, making sure you're using what you already have, and then things like time management. I mean, it's a big time management is such a massive deal. We sort of touched on that anyway, and mindfulness as well, I suppose. Both of those things sort of play into observe and interact in a way.
I would suggest that, like, I think we're jumping ahead a little bit on this one, because I think observing reality is it's the being where you are and just looking. And then I think if you were to try and make it into like meal planning at those points, it's just looking at and going like, what do I have like near and in the home already? It's
Yeah,
just it's actually a very passive principle. I think if we try to
yeah.
make it more active, apart from the engagement, is like go out and be in the place. Like, it's, if we were taking it to the garden, it's more, what do I actually have? If I stopped and was objective, what do I have around my home?
Yeah.
Like, you have quite a lot of potential growing space, but it's all in shade. If we were looking at it from like very permaculture, homesteading sort of ideal, you have quite a lot of potential growing space, shaded,
Mhm.
but potential growing space near the home. What else do you have? You have access to a large park with a prolific amount of blackberries in.
Yes.
There are quite a few wild cherry trees and other things around your estate. There's also like what shops are available to you, what local shops or producers are available. That could be a good observation, like going on Google and
Mhm.
looking for producers nearby or farmers, or getting out like an ordnance survey map and looking for agricultural listed land and go, okay, sometimes farms are just around the corner, and because they're behind a hedge or behind an estate, you don't see they're there producing. And then the interaction for that for the home could be more like, I went and had a look at the farm shop. I went and looked at this farm and saw whether they were spraying loads of crap on it. I went in the garden at the sunniest point of day and went, oh, it's actually really warm in this corner, because I was standing here in this corner. I walk in this corner, it's a lot cooler. And then that's it. But it's not making decisions at those points, just gathering as much information as you can and feeling into that, like actually going out and experiencing that information.
Could it maybe be also like, so I came back from dropping the kids off this morning
Mm-hmm.
and I walked into the space and I did actually stop. And I think I've always done this.
Yeah.
I stopped and I observed. I
Yeah.
looked around my space and I worked out what needed to be done as a homemaker, where the mess was to be made, where the meals needed to be like prepped in advance. Oh, like I've got the lovely lamb bones are making stock on the hob. I needed to switch it back on. And then actually the doing thereof.
I think the problem is that what you're doing is moving too quickly from observation to action. And I think the really important bit of this
Maybe that's okay.
yeah. No,
I
completely.
guess there's
So
a sort of
you know
small
because you know
version
your
and then a
culture.
big version,
I would
isn't
suggest that if you walked in and looked at your home and went, okay, I'm looking as I'm someone else and I've never been in the home every morning, and you had that capacity to be unobservant, because the moment you turn it into action, and this has been my mistake too, is even with a garden and all sorts of things, is turning things too quickly to action and actually not staying enough time in that principle one, which is spend longer observing. Actually, probably if you were to sit at the table, and this is something that I've found in the home, is actually when we spend slightly longer at breakfast and get more time when we're not being able to engage and holding ourselves back and engaging with like the whole of the day and observing what's actually going on, where's the children's energy at, what's the weather doing, today, and then you engage. The problem with not the problem what you're saying, because obviously there's nothing wrong with it at all, but if you wanted to apply it to this principle, I'd suggest that like actually you coming in, walk around the house calmly, stop, have a cup of tea, and then go, right, okay, what's the best way that I can improve the culture of my home based on my impassive activity? Because it's so easy to just dive straight in and start being reactive to, there are bones to do, there's plates to do, and straight away I can do this, I can do that, and straight to action. Same for me in the garden, right? So there's things where I want to have so many trees, and someone gave me trees. I just started planting trees in a cool pattern that seems to be roughly with the sun. But it was the sun for that season, and the sun solar arc changed. And actually, after a year of observation, I had to dig up every single one of my trees and replant them. And it was the right thing to do for what our aims were with the place. And after a year of interacting with it, I'm still glad I planted the trees just to learn stupid lessons. And they're always best learned by digging huge holes and pulling out massive rocks. So yeah,
a lot of big rocks.
Yeah, lots of big rocks.
Maybe there's just, I suppose this probably comes a bit later, but I think it is really important every day to take stock. I do think what you're saying is absolutely accurate. I think too much of the time you come in and you just, like I said at the beginning, you just do the same old thing. You just carry on, you crack on, and you could spend the whole day doing the same old thing that you normally do, and it's not being as efficient or leading to a change in the culture of your home. And I think that is important. Okay, should we move on to number 2?
Cool. Do you reckon we go back a little bit to be super contrary?
Go.
I think the first thing is like we're going through these principles, but I think we haven't established like why is it important to establish a permaculture, the permanent culture in your home in the first place, and what's the opposite of that? Like, what are most people doing? And
good
why do we need to establish a home culture which people didn't used to have to? And I think the first bit of that is to say like whether you have chosen a home culture or not, like a culture for your home, you are having one chosen for you. And generally it will be the dominant culture, the capitalist culture's decisions. And whether you might react to some of them, but if you don't build something other, it will be taken from you and your decisions will end up being reactions whether you choose to or not.
Yes. Yeah, I think that goes back to our very first conversation of you're either in the story or you're writing the story, or it's what story do you want?
What story do you want? Yeah, exactly. And I think that's it. And if the culture is better than the story, because the culture will tell stories, right? So this is like taking it one whole step further than our first conversation, which is a story is something that's being told, has a beginning, middle, and an end. Culture may last multiple generations, can go on for eons if you set up a home culture. There are cultural things that our parents did that we still do now. There are cultural decisions that they made that we do not do. But the point is we were given cultural decisions, not just us, and they were backed up with stories and how we told them in our home, in our own heads, that sustain them. And I think that like building a home culture and a home economy that matches that culture is like, it's incredibly liberating. Don't tell anyone. And it gives you like this incredible sense of like purpose and when you feel you're just telling a story that you can only sustain by continually telling it, it's exhausting because then you're always waking up in the morning and go, here's the story. It's super important. We need to be happier. And then the other story is going, eat loads of Nutri-Grains and get messed up. Television. Right?
Yeah.
And that's the other one. It's screaming at your children and in the television on everything. A story of consumption and lack and dependence and
so much fear.
And so much fear, like a ludicrous amount of fear. And all the other things, lust and all of these things that are just based around lack or instability. And when you build like any brick of culture, however small, that you hold to, and that will start, and you build a permanence to that aspect of culture, you build something that can't be taken. You build something that defeats the stories of fear, and you build something that could be permanent and could affect your great grandchildren if you show a way to build culture and build a culture that they love and engage with powerfully or passively without even being aware, right?
Yes.
The reason we have to build culture now is because the dominant cultural narrative has failed us. There was a point where I think people felt safe under the cultural narratives of the time. They felt like, oh, actually, if I do the British culture in my home, the Englishman's hands as castle, all those sort of things, I will feel safe. Why people sort of lust after the 50s, like that 50s life, or even some people like now are super obsessed with like 90s life, right? Because they like remember like, oh, mum was at home, that was good, or this part of that cultural time was good, and I lust after the past, not necessarily because I like want less iPhone, but maybe. But it's more, I saw a time culturally where I feel like I would feel happier because I lust after the cultural moment, and therefore making like a permanent culture in your home that sustains your home and is not dependent on outside systems, whether that's with like really practically or emotionally or whatever. There you go. So that's why I think we need to build permaculture, home economies. There's a Japanese thing called is it wa of the home, like the feeling in the home. You've disturbed the wa of my home. I saw it in a samurai movie. They did a massive fight. It was amazing. But it's about the idea that someone has disturbed the balance, the sort of feeling in your home, and how offensive that could be. And probably misquoting a whole culture, but it is based on James Clavell Shogun, and that's a really good book. So, and it's currently on Disney as a thing, and I don't particularly like that, but very cool.
No, that's cool. I'm glad you went back and addressed that, because I do think that was very important. So number two.
Sorry.
No, don't apologize. Don't do the apology thing.
Oh, I have been in Britain for the last 10 days, so I am back to apologizing like a British person. I quickly apologize for everything, just in case you offended someone, and generally be sorry for existing, which is a bad cultural thing.
It's a bad cultural thing. It's got worse and worse and worse, hasn't it?
Yeah, because it means less and less and less the more people use it, right?
Yeah.
This is not actually any sorrow.
No, it's very true. The second principle is catch and store energy. So how do you catch and store energy?
Oh, today, for example, I rake leaves off the road and throw them to my chickens. Which then increases the amount of worms underneath them, which increases the amount of eggs. We also capture like rainfall off the roof. And we store that in biochar in the soil and in like big barrels, which works really well. We also make sure that most of the waste that's produced on our place is composted. Yeah. So that's it, just sort of keeping things recycling around our home. I guess also saying we do rag rug. And we do quite a lot, use all our clothes multiple times before they go into the compost.
Yeah.
So they get used as like something. If they can be used for craft, they get used for craft. Maybe they use patches to fix other clothes. Maybe they get used just as like oiling rags. Like I was oiling a load of bowls this morning, and I was using like one of Juliet's old socks that had been washed and washed and washed, so there was no lint on it. And then it got used as a rag, and that's the storing energy. But I think that could also be like foraging, stealing other people's leaves, taking other people's grass clippings. drying your own firewood, all those sort of things. For example, like even in the UK, for example, for you, it's way cheaper to buy green logs a year and a half ahead, because actually it's the storing the logs and drying them that costs the people all the money. So if you can get green logs from someone, or you can buy a tree when it falls down, which is really cheap, by the way. As well, we were, when we were still thinking about staying in the UK and we're looking at moving to a house with log fire, someone had told me about this, and I was like, oh, because I'd seen all the trees go down in the storm, big beech trees, and actually they had like names, spray painted on them. I was like, initially I thought it was graffiti because they've done terribly. But this is someone who's not very good with a spray can, writing with bad handwriting on a tree, and they're all sold to log dealers or craftspeople. But you can go round them and then call up generally the person who manages the woodland, which you can find on the landowner registry, and then you can call them and say, "Hey, I saw this tree is down. Can I buy it?" And as long as you have, like, say, for example, a chainsaw or a friend with a chainsaw, you can get like really cheap firewood for a house, or you can buy them at the other side of the year, like, and get cheap logs. I don't know why I got into a cheap logs bend. I'm so sorry.
No, that's interesting. I don't think I really figured that. We just sort of nick tiny little bits of trees when we see them when we're out, and we sort of, the kids find it fun, and usually they collect enough for the fire that evening. 5 or 6 like little things that have fallen down. And quite frankly, there's so many big trees near where we live that was pretty easy to do every day. I don't think anyone else was picking up the little fallers, and there was plenty left over, so I felt like that was okay. The catch and store energy thing, I thought, I'm probably not very good at that because I'm not very like permaculture or like
you
eco.
Really are.
And I am actually quite good at that. I make jam from all of the blackberries. I go and knock on neighbors' doors and ask for apples. We save all our rainwater. Well, not all of it, actually. I mean, I could save a lot more rainwater.
Especially after the rain I was there. That would be a swimming pool.
Oh, well, our water butts have been full consistently this year because it's just been so wet. And then our clothes, they always get almost triple recycled. So there are lots of things.
Can I tell you what I think you're the best at on principle too?
Yeah, go on then.
I think the best way that you capture and store energy, that I don't think you'll see it as, is that you are the best at capturing memories and utilizing them later. Like you do really, you spend a lot of time taking pictures and writing and creating stories about time with people. And you capture and store that energy and utilize it really well. I think it's really beautiful, because I know that when you're low, you do a lot of like looking through pictures and books of ideas from the past, and you make those really good like idea boards and those things. I think that's an incredible way to capture and store energy, because you capture the time where you have a high energy, or you're having a really beautiful emotional moment with someone or sharing with people, and you're always really good at taking pictures, and you're always really good at capturing that and storing it until later, so that when you're not feeling as inspired as a homemaker, or you're not feeling as connected to people because of like just distance and time, that you can go and like gather. I think that's a really beautiful way that you do that, that I think homemakers can do. And I know I'm rubbish at. I have a really good memory, but there are days where I'm tired and grumpy, and I don't have the physical resource of like of a board that helps me inspire me, or of a lot of pictures. Like I spent this wonderful time with you this time, and with my brother as well. And I went away going, I didn't take any pictures of my nieces and nephews, or my brother, or me and my brother. And then luckily everyone else sent me pictures, which was really good. But I was just like, I walked away from that with nothing to help renew I didn't capture any of that energy, but I captured it in my heart. But sometimes there are times where you really need those physical things. So that's what I think you're amazing at that. And I think that's a really doable for the home.
That's a really lovely thought. I'd not thought of that. I like that. I'll take that one.
Cool.
I do. I need to catch up on my scrapbooking, but that is on the to-do list.
It's about capturing, isn't it? So it's about when there is that resource.
But you have to do the storing part. But you do have to store it, because lots of people take photos but don't do anything with them, and then doing something with them is a very important part of it. Because otherwise they just sort of, I mean, I know photos from 10 years ago have just gone into oblivion. They don't really exist anymore. So if thankfully I have got I'm looking at a collage of me and my husband from the first couple of years we met. I don't have those photos anymore in in digital form. They just don't exist. They died with one of the laptops a million years ago. So I'm just glad I've got that something to look at because, it was some very cute times.
Lovely. And I think that helps you renew those moments when there are times where you're having like, well, for example, when you have lots of small children and that relationship is more strained, it's good to remember those times where it was less strained and you remember the ease of love at points.
Yes, agreed. There's some really big ones to do with catch and store as well. Like we are actually looking into solar panels. There's a sort of council, bigger county council group that you can kind of elect to and get some savings on. So we're looking at that to see if we can get a quote because there is one side of the house that would catch a lot of solar and turn that into something potentially. So we're investigating that as an option, but it could be just too expensive.
I don't know. I would caution you against utilizing the sun always for that. I don't know. I think it's an interesting space, solar energy, and I think it's a really positive thing in some respects. And I think that then generally culturally moving away from dependence on more electrical goods,
I agree.
Ultimately, and utilizing the sun, what the sun is best for, which is creating biomass. You have enough sun, you could like make a solar dehydrator. You've got enough sun that you could grow figs against that back wall or grapes or all sorts of abundant things that would be a more abundant and sustainable means of utilizing that solar energy than sort of charging more batteries. Or if you are going to do it, have it so it's not linked to the grid and it gives you more sustainability long term for whatever is to come.
I just
not to be doom and gloomy.
No, I really love the thinking about that in so many different ways. I think that my relationship with the sun has changed so much in the last few years. And I now see myself as a battery that needs charging in the sunshine. So anytime there's been a sunny day, I sit out for as long as I can without burning and just really charge myself up at the peak part of the day. And I do feel so different for that. I'm not very good in the winter. I know you are really good at just getting out no matter what.
Yeah, I really am. I love it.
Yeah.
The amount of time you have to be outside to make it worthwhile, though, is like 3 hours, and you have to then be able to grizz the cold and still have some skin exposed. But like my face is pretty, I don't tan. I more sort of stay a sort of reddish color, a sort of tan, but not in the same way as I would want to. I'm pretty tan in the summer, but I stay a good sort of ruddy hue all the way through the year.
So number 3 is obtain a yield.
This is such a good one, right? When you start seeing a place, your home economy is something that produces rather than something that consumes, it gives you so much power. When we were in the UK and we were living in the city, that looked like a lot of foraging for blackberries. And we also processed whole animals in our garden. And we also processed roadkill to obtain a yield for our home. We also gleaned for a whole, like at the end of the season, like when they'd do the fields and have like a foot wide strip at the edge that hadn't been picked. We went and did that a couple of times. That worked really well for making beer and some bread. But it's about what the mindset shift of obtaining a yield gives you.
Yes,
I think in some respects it's to producer, and the home being a place that produces, and that changes the way that your kids see it as a place where you go to consume more. And then seeing that story around, even if that's in like, and I know everyone says this, it pisses me off so much. Is that even if you've got a little balcony, you can produce something. And that's not really true. You can, but the mindset is what's really important, because like
your balcony has to face the right way. Also,
balcony has to face the right way. One, you have to have good neighbors. Two, the amount you work to get like some salad or 2 salads worth of greens. It's just like, no calories. Whereas that same energy put into foraging, looking for things locally, even if you can't obtain like a food yield, there's no good foraging. In a cinema car park in the middle of Southampton, like right by the docks, just concrete everywhere. They have huge harakeke plant, like a New Zealand flax.
I remember this.
And yes. Without asking, and then eventually with asking, I would go and harvest there and create baskets from that harakeke that was bound in these little car park medians, and little bits between all of the car parking spaces, and gathered like loads because they had these huge established plants. And it suddenly meant that I could produce baskets in the home, in the city, from things in the city. And it started me seeing like, okay, I don't have necessarily always. It was when I decided like, I'm going to be a home that produces. And like, okay, there was times where I couldn't produce, like the fruits and vegetables sort of side, because we had like a paved garden, like fully paved. And we had maybe 1 foot by 6 foot of like border that was just supposed to be flowers. So of course we tore those out and put in fruit bushes because we're not crazy that we're shade loving fruit bushes. So blueberries, I think. And I grew 2 tiny tobacco plants as well because high yield in the small space. And we made that space work for the best yield that space and that whole area could make. And you adapt what your expectations of yield are to the space and go, let's get a yield. Let's make this host and producer. What can you produce from what you can forage in your environment? Like here, I am incredibly blessed with an absolute abundance, both from our land and the broader landscape too. So like I can produce from our land like a huge amount of food, but also from the landscape. Like we can forage a huge variety of different berries and like at volume as well, like, liters on liters on liters, tens of liters of anything, right? And we can produce carbs and calories. But yeah, there's just like wherever you are, there's always an opportunity. But it's about just changing that mindset to not what can't I do? Like my garden's not got enough shade. I've got too much this. I've got too much that. I don't have any land. I'm a landless, blah, blah, blah. Okay. How can you produce that? And then you go back to the ethics and go, okay, how do I get to a point where I can produce an excess as quickly as possible that then I can feed into my community or feed back into my home to enliven the home?
Yes.
Yeah. And I think weirdly, it's the third principle of permaculture. I think for me, it's the most important because I think once you start doing it, the rest of the systems sort of bow to it. And if you don't produce anything for your home, and I think quite a lot of permaculture people produce very little. Like they have these really elegant food forests that have 700 fruit trees, and they produce like a couple, a bit of fruit here, a bit of fruit there, bit of fruit there, a crumble or two, a crumble or two per bush, per tree a year. And they're not focused on the yield and the liberty that their yield will give them. And I think really interestingly, if you look at a guy called Ben Falk, who is someone who is in a northern climate permaculturist, beautiful Instagram stories, really lovely guy, great books, etc., etc., etc. He's really, really interestingly let cows loose on like his food forest, and I've just watched them. He just like he'll take videos of like cows just eating like the branches of these older apple trees, and I'm going, but he understands the obtainer yield and the value of those cows eating his trees at this stage in his permaculture journey is that actually the yield of like incredibly rich milk and beef from good quality grass and that cycling system is actually so superior to the food forest that he's like, you can sort of hear the permaculture like newbies or people who just see all the bits of it crying at like, no, the food forest land is being destroyed. And he's there going like, no, this is the succession of the system. But now I've built this like beauty and shade, and I've got this great quality grass, and then they've got cows that I can now sustain on my land. This is the system succeeding and obtaining a yield. And I think there's something like, there's obviously a really big, obvious example to back something up, but it's like, it's so empowering to make things.
It's that reducing your dependence on something as simple as a supermarket or Amazon Prime that most people I'd say still are using, and there's nothing wrong with those, always going to have to say that sort of thing, but it feels so much better to make things from scratch, make things yourself. And I think also it's in those moments where you're like, what shall I do? And you're either going to choose to like I said earlier, you're either going to choose to sit on your phone and scroll Instagram or turn the TV on, or you could produce instead of be that consumer. And it is, and there is such a power in that shift.
Yes.
And in creating and making it, whether that's as simple as, in fact, you're using resources you have to create something artistic, or you're writing something with pen and paper, or even even typing, that's also fine. Making something is so empowering for a reason, because when you're choosing to do that, you're not spending your time consuming, you're not spending your time listening to opinions and advice and adverts and which are just literally everywhere. And that is what you're saying, is that feeling. It's so empowering. Agreed.
Yeah, and it really is. And I think, again, making this even more practical again, because the ethereal part of it is super important, but like, you can take produce that's really lower grade visually and turn it into some incredible food. So like, if you go to a lot of farmers markets, at the end of the day, there's like low grade produce. Or if you ask behind the counter of farmers markets or markets in England in general, you say like, have you got any seconds, or have you got a lot of something at the season? Like at the height of beetroot season, I think we could pick up like second grade beetroot's for, I think like the price on the market is like $3.50. I don't know where they are, but it was like
that's when you were going through the borscht phase.
Yeah, and then we batch cooked
the
living what's out of them. Batch cook and fill up the freezer. We'd also pickled beetroots because we could get them so cheaply. I think it was like 30% of the market cost, because they were ugly and required quite a bit. They required not quite a lot more. I took my time in the evening and turned it into abundance for my family by taking something that was visually unappealing to the market people, and I picked it up cheap. But you do have to go and have those relationships and engagements and do that. And then it's the same with the baskets. It's the same with all of it. It's just going like, instead of going like, oh, I can't do this, and you're going like, okay, I can't do this and I can't do that, but what can I do? Okay, I can go, for example, I can go to a game dealer and pick up a whole deer at £3 a kilo. Like, and then I can cut it up and I can get, if I pick up the right time of day, I can get leather, bone stock, pate, all of the meat for the family for like a month. Like, and I was eating really well for that month. Sausages, all the things at £3 a kilo for organic, free range, super best meat ever. But all I have to do then take my time, generally for about a day, and turn that waste. And especially if you get it off the side in England, I was driving around England a lot the last 10 days. You know how many roe deer I saw that were just great, and I just couldn't throw my boot because I wasn't able to. I just didn't have anywhere to butcher it.
Yep.
Like 8, and I wasn't even I was on the road like every morning, but I wasn't like on more than a normal commute. I counted them. I got seven deer. One fallow, one red. Most of them were roe in different states of destruction. But like most of them, you can get you could have foraged a whole half a deer. And if you go on YouTube and go, what do I need to look out for on roadkill deer? And there's like hundreds of people going, this is how you forage roadkill deer, and know that they're not going to kill you. But generally your nose knows. So that's a good one. My point is, there is always a free resource, and there's always something you can be utilizing. I get really excited about it, Janie. Yeah. So I could keep going about that for like a whole another 2 hours, I think.
I do think it's a fantastic one.
Yeah.
So the next one is number 4, apply self-regulation and accept feedback. It's everyone's favorite principle. It's probably the hardest one. I mean, there's a whole culture at the minute of mindfulness. I hate that word, but I like this way of saying it. Apply self-regulation and accept feedback. It's being open to criticism, listening to other people, but it's also working out that you need to be the one to regulate yourself.
Yes.
I don't think we need to talk about this one for very long.
No. I think that sort of is in there, but I think I hated one thing you said. Right? Can I say that you said listening to feedback? I think that feedback in your home is real.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not like, I think feedback, I think when you say it like that, people might misunderstand it as from other people. And you have to understand that when you do anything like that tries to build permanence in a world of impermanence, people will look at that and go, oh, that offends me. And they'll give you feedback. You need to not listen to that and accept the real feedback of your home. I fed my kids good food. They had good energy. Okay, what happened? I gave them a breakfast that was higher in protein, and they were able to emotionally regulate better all day. That's real feedback. Someone else coming along going, you can't give your kids eggs. You don't even give them nutrients. You don't give them like Wheatos. You're a bad mummy. That's not very nice. You should give them Cocoa Pops. And then that's not real feedback. But that's a cultural feedback. It's a very obviously trite thing, but it actually has meaning. In that, like, other people's feedback outside of your system, the system will feed back to you what you are doing in it. The culture will feed back to you what you're doing in it. And annoyingly, the home culture horrible mirror if you look into it, of feedback, and self-regulation similarly so. But the
Yeah.
other side, the other one is that culturally self-regulation is maybe over-egged to keep you passive. And I think sometimes most
Oh, yeah.
people can do loads more than they think. And I think that's why you need to accept feedback.
Yeah.
But I
We
think
think of
sometimes,
ourselves as too
yeah,
brittle and too delicate to be
I
able to
need
do anything
I
practical.
need to sit down and do this and can I do it? And you're like, okay. But sometimes you need to give yourself, well, I want to build this culture more than I want to be comfortable. And once you start there, then you set your regulation higher. And I think sometimes actually self-regulation isn't like holding yourself back. Sometimes that's just kicking your own ass enough to get to the point where you have something that will sustain you, will give you something beautiful. Because I think our culture says, no, just slow down. Get the experts to tell you what to do. Instead of going like, you're getting the feedback from around you going, this is happening. And I'm putting this in and I'm getting this come back. Okay, something isn't working here. How do I fix it? Okay, now I'm going to regulate myself up to go and fix this because it's going to then ultimately give me more peace, more joy, more time. But sometimes that might suck for a year or 2 years or 5 years. And you get to a point eventually where it does hit the system, the culture that you wish because you fought for it and you gave yourself over and above what you could do to get to a point because you can see the feedback is good when something good happens. Sometimes you have to push through a lot.
I like the way your brain works, brother.
I think
I do find this one a bit of a challenge because I think I'm really bad at it. I think maybe we all are. I do. I find I can see it. I can see where I need to change. I can see the feedback I'm being given from decisions I make and how it affects our lives. But the actual doing of it, I can really be my own worst enemy.
Yeah. I think the culture wants you to dial up at the wrong times, especially for women. I think it's horrible being a lady in the modern age. I would so glad I'm a man.
Oh, I don't know. I wouldn't want to be a man either in
Oh man, it's
2024.
amazing. I love it. Especially when I look at it and look at like the struggles of femininity and the cultural story around womanhood and the just so much shite that like they get you all seem to be bombarded with. I just think it's so unfair. It's so
That's
cruel.
probably true.
And if you look culturally at how women have always lived and how community based that is, cross culturally, there's always a community of women, and women are always working in community. And then we're in a culture that says like, be a strong, independent woman, and even if you're not, like you should be, or if you should be in community, you should do it as a separate thing rather than that's like the necessity. All animals have female community almost without exception.
Yes.
And seeing like that cut off, I think that's why it's really hard to regulate because you're a being that I get in trouble right now, but it's supposed to be regulating in a community and held by the community, and isn't, and you're having to self-regulate. That's incredibly cruel.
Yes.
If you took an animal that's designed to be a pride animal and put it by itself, the stress of that can kill it like straight away. It's like, where am I? I don't know what to do. I've got no herd.
It is stressful not being in right community.
Amen.
Yeah. Makes me sad.
Okay. But I think the other side of that is that sometimes when you get to principle number 4 and it's a struggle, you probably need to go back to principle number 1.
Yes.
And then stop and be impassively look at where you're at and then go back through. The reason it's principle number 4 is if you've done principles 1, 2, and 3, number 4 should start being easier because you should have something to calibrate it to.
Yes.
Does that make sense? I think sometimes that's where I struggle when I'm doing going through principle-based permaculture or principle-based homesteading, whatever. When you get to number 4 and you're struggling, go back to number 1. And sometimes that's go, okay, stop, sit back, observe. Okay, sometimes you've observed and you jumped off too quickly. And I've done it in the garden like 1,000 times. Like, and that's where I'm learning is like, okay, slow down. Where is this good? I mean, and this is taking something that's very emotional and turning into something gardening, and we're going to do that, but flip-flopping the whole time. But hopefully we will have got the idea here that it's not really about gardening.
Yeah.
But the idea being whether it's with your kids or with the garden, you stop and you actually take like an extra week to plant things, or you take an extra bit of time in the morning, like actually going to take 20 minutes. 20 minutes where I should be washing up. I'm going to stop and I'm going to observe the home and go, right, where would I be the most effective? And what systems are breaking down? What system is making this happen? And I know that you've done a really good job of like addressing systems that weren't working for you in your home. adjusting things like bedtimes and things like that are causing the problems, so that those problems are turning up less often.
The protein for breakfast, man.
Protein
It's always the protein for breakfast.
It, like, for all of the family, it always helps.
Yeah.
Yeah. We're still eating the exact same breakfast we have been for the last 5 years, and it serves the family really well. Highly recommend. Omelets, butter, fresh sourdough bread, long fermented, not any of that quick fermented nonsense, like minimum 12-hour ferment, minimum. And my wife will tell me off when I get off this, and she'll be like, no, it's not 12 hours, it's 18 and 3/4. Or it's 2 days. And I know that sometimes we're eating 4-day fermented bread, and it's even better. Anyway, my point there being is that it's something that you can sustain locally. It's that.
Well, there's a reason that the classic English breakfast is the classic English breakfast for a reason. Sausage, bacon, eggs, beans, tomatoes, mushrooms. What am I missing? Black pudding sometimes.
Yeah.
And I feel like there's one more thing. Don't know. Anyway, brown sauce.
Brown sauce.
Can't miss the brown sauce.
Depends on where you are in the UK. Like, I had fried breakfast the whole time I was in the UK, and some people have hash browns, some people don't.
Yeah, that's true. I feel like it's Americanism, the hash brown thing.
I know. I think like having fried potato, like potato farls from Ireland, right? Really good. Soda bread. Like, I had a sort of Irish one when I was up north, and it had like soda farls and potato pancakes, and I was like, potato pancakes with like the soda bread, and I was like, yes. So this is it. And there's a white pudding in there as well.
I could have like a latkes with like a little smoked salmon and a poached egg on the top. I'd be so happy right now.
Yeah, it'd be so good. Again, with a lot of these things, like when people are making big changes in life, it's a lot easier to sometimes start with food. And so we talked about this a little bit before, I know, but building your home economy based on where you actually live and the glorious abundance that is available to you there is incredible. But you have to commit to it. And again, this is not to like, so you can't have bananas, but it's to say, like, actually look at what's available to you from your land and your area and build a diet, the majority of your home diet, on what's actually available in your area, in your climate. And I think generally that will add to the richness of your home. It also means you have to be more creative, and you don't have to look at older recipe books. That like building that defense makes your home economy cheaper, which gives you more access to reinvest in the home or into yourself or into other areas that are going to build better culture. And I think there's something really powerful in like local food systems that reflect where you're from, and not having imported foods, because then it gives you the ability to see, like, be seasonal. Because especially if you want to buy good quality stuff, and you want to buy it cheap, you have to buy seconds from the garden or the farmer's market, or uglies from a produce farmer. And I highly recommend uglies.
A slightly funky looking sweet corn from your own allotment.
Yeah, exactly. That's even better.
Yeah.
So okay. I think sorry, go on. Oof. No. And I'm going to apologize every time we change. I just could totally go off on all of these for days.
The tangents make it interesting. It's wonderful.
Okay.
Number 5. I think we'll get to number 6, and then we're going to have to make this a 2-parter, aren't we?
Okay. Yeah, and we'll whiz through.
Otherwise, it's going to be so long. But I think it's rich and important, and I don't want to skip too fast over them, unless the next 2 suck. Obviously, they're not going to. Number 5. Use and value renewable resources and services.
Yeah, I think that sort of speaks for itself.
Again, it kind of does, doesn't it?
We can go deeper into that, but I think that would just be covering other ground we've already done.
I had some very practical thoughts about this one.
Yeah.
And they're very short. So, using a bike where you can. Using public transportation where you can. And it's funny because I feel like we've all heard that message for our entire lives, but it's actually like less convenient, and you actually have to make a choice to do so.
I'm going to feedback on that. I was in the UK, right? And I saw people on bikes and I thought, that person is going to die. And all the people who know who regularly use a bike in the UK have one really bad close call, or go to hospital once a year from being on their bicycle. So I think there's that story.
Should we just all go and move to the Netherlands?
Yeah.
And countries where they're better.
Most of the rest of Europe, where there's big, wider roads where you can cycle on them. Whereas the UK, it's like, the roads are just like the older infrastructure with lots of houses built next by. They can't extend them. They can't make them wider. And when they go in out of a bike lane, they just make the car lanes smaller. And they go, I'm sure the cars will just move over. and run at each other like jousting horses and see who wins on the road while there's someone cycling in the cycling lane, which is super safe. And I'm like, this is ludicrous.
But they did make the buses. They did make those a little cheaper and easier to access for
I
most
didn't know
people.
this. I was about to say how I wasn't a rail on the buses, but I have been on English trains as well, and they were
So
a
my
little
husband
bit
does.
horrific.
He does get the buses
Nice.
into town, and we sometimes take it to the other town, and
Yeah,
we're really only on one line where we are, but it
nice.
goes up and it goes down. So we've got a bit of a choice. And if
Yeah.
you plan your day around it and use it, it's a much better use of those renewable resources and services.
But is it, again, I think with this is when you're building the permanent culture of your home, being honest about the capacity. It's better to have a car and create ways that you don't need to go out to get the things you're getting in the car, like entertainment or culture. So using the car less than it is to
become a
get
martyr.
a bus, but have a bus that costs you a lot of money comparatively to the fuel that would probably cost you to get there. Especially if you're taking kids with you, and costs you a lot of energy and the stress of being on it, the stress of getting there on time. And I think but that's a case of looking at your whole system as a whole system. Mm-hmm. And that's observing and going, okay, what would this add to my home? So for us, we don't have a car. We haven't had one for like 2 years and 8, 9, almost 3 years now, right? Coming up on 3 years in a couple of months. And it's the best thing for our home. For our home, it's the best thing. And for me, it lets me live one of my principles really powerfully, and it renews my soul. But you know what also it does? When you're cycling on the snow and even with the studded tires, and you slid over and you fall into a snowbank and you're freezing and it's horrible and the wind's up and you still have to go to shops because you haven't quite finished your self-sufficient system, and you need that coffee, then that's where
it builds resilience and character.
No, for me, it's great because I love suffering for the things I love. This is better than suffering for things I don't love and suffering silently. Oh no, the great masses of crying people in their living rooms. I'm being trite about saying I really care about it. Yeah, I think there are times where it's about looking at the whole of it, observing your culture and where is the best places that we can do this. And like, there are times where okay, actually, me walking to the kids to school and taking 40 minutes to do a job I can do in 5 gives me this, and this for my culture. It's going to cost this, and this, but I can renew that by building this cultural system here. And it's about building systems that sustain. I think that's the whole point, building that permanence of culture. And even in that game, like the value of me walking the kids to school is worth the inconvenience of that than taking an hour and a half all in for the day rather than 20 minutes. Because the stories, the time, even the don't go in the road, like those engagements, they'll remember those a lot more than got out of the car. And obviously, if you can walk to school,
we have to use the car, but we make it a nice thing.
Yeah, and the point is like making those, but that is a cultural choice. It's a choice you made.
Yes.
That this value of this adds up to this one, adds up to that, adds up to this. Okay, and that would allow this as the whole of our culture to thrive, be better, and yet, wouldn't it be better if we could all do whatever, a community of local friendly schools and have a farm and whatever the dream of permaculture is, but instead going, okay, instead of just grasping for a scrap of a dream, build a culture of the home that creates a reality that's beautiful, rather than I want to have I'm going to have my micro food forest and I'm going to collect this. I'm going to all the little the trash, the scrappy trash, the glittery bits of tinsel that are left over from Christmas, instead of going, I'm going to celebrate and build a culture that's ours and of our place and fits our family and that may last for generations. Our grandparents, our Swedish grandparents, had a home culture in one of their houses that was very powerful because of where they were, and they were very in place. And that stage of their life was incredibly powerful, who it impacted. And I still tell stories of the culture they created in that place.
It was very strong.
A place called Oak Cottage in Devon.
It was in a little hamlet. Everyone knew each other. There was a farm as well. So it was like old farm cottages, wasn't it?
Big house, lots of veg things, but they had a culture that would result. That house wasn't about that house or that place. It was the home culture that house facilitated and was linked to it that made that place feel calming and beautiful and filled us all with great memories, I feel.
Yes. Yeah.
But it was the place facilitated a culture that they had already in their hearts they wanted to create, and their hearts created a culture in that place that everyone else in that village, not everyone who lived in that exact place had that level of joy, happiness, and they were all people who were exactly the same place, exactly the same fiscal income, fiscal everything, but they didn't have a culture of place, and therefore they lost something. They didn't have the same place, even though we were in exactly the same place.
That's because it was slightly built on ideals of our grandfather who spent time in that place.
He had a cultural ideas. Yeah, he had cultural ideas that was from someone else's culture. Then he took forward and recreated in his cultural space from his heart, from his head. This is what we talked about earlier on. Like, they had to live in a city in different places. That they had cultural ideals that were saying, but they couldn't live them out in certain fullness until they had the right place, but they kept those alive through other places.
Amen. Right. Yeah. Number 6.
Yeah.
Last one. Big one.
Right.
Really big one. Produce no waste.
Yeah. I think this is one that's been super co-opted by consumerism. Like, no, you got to buy the special glass this and the special that.
Don't have to buy the special zero waste stuff.
No.
Don't buy anything. Use what you have.
Buy nothing. But I think this thing is like, what is waste? And I think that's it. It's just like, producing no waste is important, but it's about having a system that closes. And I think that's also in your head too.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. Ooh.
Right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Agreed.
And it's the same as every other thing we've talked about.
Something I believe in super passionately is making sure what you're listening to, what you're spending your time with, watching, reading, isn't a waste of space.
Yeah. Trash in, trash out. That's true.
Yep.
With every system, right?
Yeah.
And that can be compost and composting, and that can be like, I put complete garbage. I mean, I hate Outlander, but like some trashy TV show that just spikes all of those bits of your head, like makes you lust after things, makes you seek for things that aren't positive for some people. Some people obviously can use the same tool for something really positive to inspire change. But I think there's certain bits like, you put loads of trash in your head, you're going to have trash coming out your head. And I think that's really important. So you have to be careful of what you put into your system, your culture. I think that's why it's also really important to guardian like what your kids put into their heads too, and like be like a psychotic censor, right? Because I think the culture wants to fill them up really subliminally. And like, so I've watched some kids shows, like, and we watch like an episode and I go, the kids are never going to watch any of this because the subliminal narrative is really disgusting.
Yeah,
like, and it's vulgar, and what it does is build rampant psychotic egos of kids, and they go like, oh, but it's just about a panda, it's a nice story. Like, no, it's not. That child is acting incredibly poorly with an insane ego, and if they mimicked 1/10 of what she's doing, it would break my heart, because it makes them incapable to be in community. It makes them incapable to be with other people. It builds a culture in my home that would destroy my home. And it's all because I let them watch some silly show that then they mimic an idea of, or think, oh, that seems cool because she's the hero, or he's the hero.
Yeah.
I mean, Red Panda is a terrible show. I think it's called Red Panda, is it? Yeah, terrible. I think we watched about 10 minutes. So I was like, this is never coming on my house ever again.
Yeah, I watched it without the kids so I could censor it, and then I was like, oh, yeah, no.
And there are other ones where you have, then you have things that seem innocuous. But then my point is, like, be a psychotic censor for yourself and for others, and be really aware of those things. And also, like, because that's the waste of your head. Like, don't waste your time. Don't waste that. But also, like, again, don't produce any waste. Like, do find things where you can have like stuff that's renewable. Oh, mate, Surya and me were talking about this really about changing the way you dress to a wardrobe as opposed to outfits. Right?
Ooh, yeah.
Because this is a way of like changing, and this is a thing that you can apply to lots of things. And like, so changing your diet for sort of like to, this is our cultural foods. So then there's no waste in your larder. So everyone knows, or your pantry. Americans call it pantry, and I think it's funny because pants are knickers in England. There you go. Pants are underwear. I don't even know what Americans call underwear.
Pants-tree.
Pants-tree. Anyway. Sorry. My point here is the idea of building a system that replaces a consumption. So
Yeah.
when my wife, we were recently renewing our wardrobes, and it's like, okay, let's build a wardrobe. Like, what do you want to wear? And what can we add that if you just picked out any items from that wardrobe, you would always be well dressed because
Yes.
you have I wear this.
There's a niche market here, by the way, that's being probably exploited by consumerism, you know.
What?
In this, the minimalist closet
Oh, is that a thing?
kind
Is it?
of.
I didn't even know.
Oh yeah, people have like, okay, you take 10 items and these are the only 10 items you wear and you like for the month of, or maybe for a whole season. You have a
Yeah,
10 item closet or a 20 item closet.
but that's still not a wardrobe. Like, that's not a
No,
wardrobe. Like,
it's not. It's not, you see.
it's
So
not.
actually what
It's
it
just
makes
another
you do is
consumption.
then
Yeah,
think you need another full 10 or 20. Whereas
yeah,
with I'm always jealous of my husband. He knows
yeah,
exactly what he likes. He wears exactly the same things.
yeah,
He always looks good. It requires hardly any thought.
yeah.
And I think it's been way overcomplicated for ladies when historically, if we go back, we would have looked excellent in our massive skirts, blouses, maybe a casual like jacket to keep us
You
warm or like
literally
a
described my
vest.
wife's new wardrobe. Yeah, yeah, linen shirts with a wool overlayer and optional extras,
Yeah.
and large
I would
skirts.
just love it to be as simple as that. So
Yeah,
in fact, you just
I
always look
think
good
it
and they
kind of
know
is.
you.
Like, we recently bought Briar, our youngest girl, some like dresses, linen dresses, and they're like, oh man, they're not warm enough on our legs. So we bought her a petticoat, and the petticoat
Oh,
makes
that's so
everything a
cute.
double. It makes an extra layer of insulation,
Yeah.
and her legs are not cold anymore because she's got the extra layer of insulation. So she doesn't need leggings or an extra thingy.
That's
It's just
so
like,
cute.
oh, because there's a reason that, because obviously that's a wonderful thing about culture, is that without an input from an external source, it sorts these things out. And actually, truth like comes through in culture.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like, why are certain cheeses more popular than others? Well, because there was a point in history where if you made the best cheese and everyone started buying that cheese, and it's one of
Better.
the weird things about market capitalism that is like a good refining process, but also it would happen without that anyway within a trade network, is that if you have something that's good, other people either mimic it or want it, and they want more of it. So you create more of it. And the point is, like, and when you look at like how all cultures eventually dress across the whole world, probably early 1800s, 1700s, there is a similarity of what people need from their clothing that is mixed everywhere. So if you look
Yeah.
at like the long shirt and tight trousers from the waist down, like that hug to your calves and they've got a lot of air around your trunk, like that's really common of all men across all cultures. Like a slightly longer shirt that covers your sort of waist and butt, and then like tight trousers that get tighter as they go down, so you've got a lot more movement in the thighs and a lot more security, so they're not picking up loads of dew from the bottom. Every culture at like peak beginning of agriculture, where you start having more homogeneity, there is a need that is refilled with it. Same with women. It's like, okay, generally quite a lot of air getting up to your bits that need a lot of air, a lot of movement from the waist down because you're picking up, bending down, going everywhere. You need to have a lot more movement than men for your general day on your lower half. So skirts and dresses work better for that in every culture. The same with blouses and those things, because they are layers that you can take on, off, up and down. Same with
And also
waistcoats.
practical for
Yeah.
like most women who are breastfeeding for a very, very long time.
Yeah, super easy. And it's just
Yeah.
this whole thing where, you know, the culture will refine itself to a permanence that works, and it works everywhere. So you don't have to look very far back to go, what permanently works for a wardrobe, for a clothes, for this? So you don't have to create waste, because then that can become things. So, for example, if I get good corduroys that I have right now, when I'm done with them, I can cut them up and make 2 pairs of trousers for my kids, which we've done now once before, and go, okay, there's a permanence there. And if they have the same wardrobe because they're expecting to do the same things, and I'm not trying to make them dress like kids too much, then we can build a permanence and create no waste, but in a way that's like it renews and gives life and joy and like blah to the culture, fire, excitement.
Yeah. Yeah.
And there's, you know, again, it's the same for your brain. It's the same for everything. Woo! So exciting. We're going to do this with every single permaculturist one. By the end of it, we're going to like, there's 21 permaculture principles. I can't handle it.
There's 12,
Anyway,
guys. Don't worry. We're
yeah,
nearly halfway.
yeah,
Um,
cool.
The produce no waste one I think is so key because there's been
Yeah.
so much chat about the zero waste plastic free kind of thing. I want to reference a book that I actually really love, which is A Family Guide to Waste Free Living by Lauren and Oberon Carter. I love that as a resource if you have not ever heard about waste free living and you want to know, there are so many practical things in that book. But as a family as well, we're doing a challenge to ourselves for half term. We're going to do a zero waste week. And we've already started thinking about it and talking about it. I've got a couple of little books for the kids. It's all very cute because they don't really spend loads of time at school talking about like waste and being environmentally friendly yet. I'm sure it will be some kind of bit that they do talk about, but I want that to be an important thing that we talk about and make better decisions on because it just out of convenience and ease, we've just gone in a slightly different direction that I'm not happy with. And so I'd like to change a few things and I just want to just experiment, push us a little bit and see where we can change things in our day-to-day, in our habits to be, I don't think I want to be zero waste or waste
But
free
like
or
pro moves on this one,
but
right? Do you want like a pro tip? A couple of pro
yeah, pro
tips.
tip me. Go.
Pro tips on actually reducing less waste. Look
Yeah.
in your bin and see what the waste is,
Yes, it's
right?
horrifying. Don't do that.
And I think for us, it's all the end of the year. It's all like what we have before is meat packaging,
Mm,
and that was all the plastic waste we were producing, but it was
that's pretty good.
so much,
Yeah.
like weirdly lots. But my point is like, what is the waste you are producing?
It's
Let's
all
start with that.
packaging
Like,
from it's packaging from a supermarket because I haven't gone
cool.
out my way.
So
There's
yeah,
so many resources nearby. I have two farms. I have veg stalls. I have bakers. I even have a refillable milk place that I can drive to. It just will take a day for me to go to all of those places to get everything I
but
need, and then
one
another
day a
day to
month,
make everything.
right? But you can buy, like, here's something that we found really helpful is just buy bigger joints. If you're one of those people
Yeah.
who still is buying pieced chicken, for example, or you can't buy like a half a lamb and buy like, so if you want to reduce your waste for like butchering, for example, like if like for us, you look in the bin and go, oh my goodness, I've just got meat packaging. What do I do? Okay, cool. Buy one size bigger. Like you don't have to go and do a whole animal straight away, but like go buy a leg of lamb instead of bits of lamb. Then bone out that leg, make the stock, make yourself some mince, make yourself this. You can get a hand mincer, and for like doing small volumes, anything under like 5 kilos, it's really good. When you're getting
Yeah.
to like 25 kilos of stuff you need to mince and you want to make sausages and all that, get an electric one. But hand mincers are really good up until that point. Get a mincer. They cost nothing. They're super cheap. I think they're maybe 20 quid on Amazon. Or you can get one from a secondhand store or an antique store in the UK or eBay Antiques on the UK. There's loads of them. I like the Reliance Mills by Husqvarna. They are everywhere and they are obviously really popular at one point. All the parts of it, you can buy replacement parts from China because people are still using them there. But my point is like just doing things like that, like buying a bigger joint of beef and then sectioning it out, or buying a bigger, like buying a whole chicken rather than bits
It's all
and
about
sectioning it
the
out.
whole chicken and the whole duck is just it's 2, 3,
Yeah,
4 meals because you've got
yeah.
well, it depends how many of you there are, but
Well, for
also
us, we
if you're
still,
eating a lot,
yeah.
cook two at the same time.
Here in Sweden, we only get 1.1 kilo chickens. We're a 2 chicken household now, but that
Yep.
still does like 1 3/4 meals, probably. Let's go from that.
Yeah.
So we still get the
And
big
then the
meal, which is all the
stock.
chicken. Then we get the leftover chicken the next day in like a pasty. Then we're making like some good stock from it. And so it goes round and round. So we're using that waste until it's almost got nothing left. And by the time it's finished in the stock bones, it goes out. It's got nothing left in it for the animals, but it's got good stuff left in it to break down the compost, and it breaks down super fast after you made it in stock
Yeah.
because you've just ripped out everything good in there, and all you've got left is carbon, really, that then breaks down soil really fast. And then you still sometimes dig in the garden and find a little chicken bone pop up, but very rarely in the compost. But yeah, I think that those sort of bits there, and the same, like just buy a bigger stuff. Like it's way cheaper to buy 25 kilos of flour from Dove's Farm in the UK.
Yes.
Get 25 kilo bags sent over. Generally, they also mill it. They mill the 25 kilo bags to order, I believe, at certain places. And then you're actually getting fresher flour. So even though you'll keep that bag longer, the flour you're getting has been sat on the shelf way less.
Yes.
And you
Or
can
buy
even,
grain and get a mill.
yeah, I mean, that is the next level. And we
That
are
is
just
the
about
next
to
level.
start our
Those are
grain
super
milling.
expensive, and I have not got one.
Oh my goodness. I would suggest to you that we realized that in the first winter of, so not even a full season, so like 4 months, we will save all the money that we would spend on flour by having the mill. So we would make up. No, it will take until midsummer next year to fully pay in saved money for the mill.
That's pretty good, isn't it?
So because a kilo of grain, a kilo of biodynamic organic wheat here costs us, I think, the equivalent of about 3 quid. 40p. 40p. Sorry. So not 4 quid, 40p. And the same kilo in flour would cost us about just under £2. So every time we are grinding flour, we are saving £1.60. The entry level on them is 400 quid. So let's not mess around. That is true. However, that being said, you can buy the Masa mills, so MASA mills from eBay, and they are more like 30. But then you do get a lower quality flour. You have to sift a lot more. So you have more waste. However, you're still going to be saving so much. And if you are someone who doesn't, like for us, we go through on average, I think 6 to 8 kilos of flour a week because we only have potatoes and wheat as our carbs. We don't get outside of that. So we produce quite a lot of bread and pastry. So yeah, we do need a bigger mill. But I think if we was just to Sophia and I would use the Masa mill that we have. Super cheap. And you can buy new plates for it for, I think, like a £5. So if you just replace the plates on a cheap 30, I think they're now more like, when we bought it was 20 quid. I think now they're more like 40. But if you bought a 40 quid mill with new plates and change the plates every 6 months, you can make flour from that. So you have to put in more physical effort, but you save is a tenth of the price of the next thing. I do, however, really, really recommend the D525 Diamant mill. I love it. I have been fantasizing about it for ages, and we finally have it. And everything about it is wonderful. There you go. Anyway, so this is really good to go through these. I feel like anyone who's managed to stay this long and still interested, I'm very proud of you. And I hope that you are feeling as inspired as I was by this conversation, and to be able to see, like, I'm really proud of what you are doing to build your home culture. And like, I know it's like a long road to build a home culture, but you only have to get there before your kids leave home and then have an experience of a home culture that's functional for you to seed something that's really beautiful, for you to have permanence there.
One of the principles is about like going slowly, and we will get onto that in part 2.
Yeah. Ooh, so exciting.
Because we're going to have to finish.
I disagree with that.
I don't know when, away. But what?
They're growing slowly. Well, we'll talk about that next time.
Some things are just naturally slow, right?
Yeah, but some people are just weak.
Sure.
And we will have a discussion about that later today.
Well, thanks for this, Martin.
Yeah, that's our trailer for the next one. Martin getting angry about slowness.
Right, we'll organise a part 2. I hope you enjoyed this introduction to permaculture, everybody. And thank you, Martin, so much for joining me on this.
Oh, it was wonderful. Thank you, Alyssa.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you so much for listening today. Thank you for making it all the way to the end. If you did enjoy this episode, please think about following my brother over on Instagram at The Roots and Bones and me at The English Homemaker. Supporting us there means a lot. It means we can share it with people that have never heard us before. But the best thing you can possibly do is actually to share this with a friend, family member, or a colleague. Just talking about the podcast really gets the message out there, and I think this is an important one to share. I think it could change a lot of people's perspective on things, and I think that's neat. If you want to take it one step further, leaving a comment and a review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you're listening to this, and hitting a subscribe button means a lot also. And if you head over onto YouTube, you can leave me a comment over there and subscribe and follow there also. You may have noticed there are no adverts, no sponsors of this podcast, and I'd like to keep it that way. Perhaps one day I'll open up a Patreon. The only money I earn from this podcast is probably about 50 pence a month from my YouTube views, and that's about it. And I'd really like to keep it that way. I do this podcast not for getting anything for myself financially. I do it because I know what it feels like to be a homemaker that feels alone, specifically an English homemaker that feels alone in what she's doing. And I don't want you to feel the same. And so I hope that this benefits you in some way, even if it is simply making you feel less alone in how you're thinking, what you're thinking, things you're discovering. So yeah, I hope you have a really fabulous rest of your day, and check back in a fortnight for a new episode. Bye.